Recording. Beautiful. Hi, guys. Adam here, and I've got my boss with me, Jason McClintock, who is the Head of Relationships and Acquisition for Global Commercial Services here at American Express.
Hi, everyone.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you very much for your time. Greatly appreciate doing this for us.
My pleasure.
Before we begin, I do need to get some consent for the recording. Everything I ask you here, we will be transcripting at the end, and it will be used for our report at UNSW. You're happy with that?
No problem at all.
Fantastic. Part of the assignment, just to explain what we're trying to do here, is we need to identify the next big thing in our market and future-proof a company for it.
Right.
So the questions we'll be asking will be around what you view that is and how we can, how us as American Express, or you think you may go about future-proofing Amex for that.
No problem.
Great. We might start with some generic stuff. Would you be able to tell us a bit about your career, where you've been? I know you had a trip to Hong Kong and all that sort of stuff, a couple of positions you've done. It's just all part of the report. We'd like to do a bit of a bio in it.
Yeah, nice one. So you can find me on LinkedIn as well, folks, so please connect with me throughout. But I guess I've been over 20 years in financial services here in Australia and Asia. So let me take you all the way back post-high school. I left high school and jumped into a role straight at Westpac, one of the major banks here in Australia, and spent about 9 years at Westpac, doing a whole heap of different things. I pretty much changed roles every 9 to 12 months. It was kind of what was expected back in the banking days, the older days, if you like. But probably for the last 4 to 5 years of my time at Westpac, after leaving the FX business, played a role in their product management business for local domestic banking products. So that covers everything from payables, receivables, and working capital, and things like bank checks, BPay, BPay View, the direct entry systems, which is really the new payments platform today that the banks have relaunched, and a whole heap of, cash account solutions. So if you think about corporates and where they keep their money, that's all cash management. So there's a whole heap of products around that. So after Westpac, I came to American Express to kind of jump into a sales role, selling FX, and that was really good fun because that business back in 2004 had 6 or 7 people in it. It's now 150 plus people business, so it's a much bigger business today. And did a whole heap of stuff in my first round with Amex, spending all that time in the FX business, doing everything from sales, setting up the operations team to what it is today, playing a role in developing probably 2 versions of our portal that our customers are transacting on both internally and through our back office, and then ultimately led the desk and the client management group for the FX business, predominantly servicing small to medium-sized entities in managing their FX risk. I had an opportunity then through a network and a good friend of mine who worked for me at Westpac, who was up in HSBC with Hong Kong, for me to then go and work for him for 3 years in their trade business. And that was a great opportunity for me, after spending some time through Asia with Amex and some secondment type roles, to spend sort of 3 years in Hong Kong working for HSBC Trade Bank. And there I was sort of really looking after their global strategy team, which was a team of about 10 people, where we would just go and actually evaluate business ideas and change programs that the bank were trying to bring in. So a great role, and Hong Kong, obviously very topical in the news today, a very different place back in 2010 to 2013 where I was there. Came back from Hong Kong into Australia after my contract ended and actually worked in a few of my friends' businesses in sort of quasi roles, but then an opportunity came back to rejoin Amex. So they call me a retread right out of it. So I left and came back and rejoined our FX business for a couple of years and was leading again the client group, our FX desk, doing all the physical buying and selling of our currencies, and leading about 40 relationship managers around the country at the time, and doing a lot of product development. So probably one of my big achievements in my time back at Amex was releasing and launching the Access Line capability, which is our payables working capital solution. We might touch on that throughout, because I think payments and payables is a big part of how we're going to future-proof our business over the next little while. And in the last couple of years, I've been the head of large market, and as Adam mentioned, looking after both the relationship and acquisition side. So this is a great role. Really fortunate. I'm really fortunate to
have some great staff.
Excluding 1 or 2 of them. Not bad. But it's a great role because, and, Adam will attest to this, we look after Amex's top 500-600 clients here in Australia from a corporate setting. So there's a lot of diversity in that role. We're very fortunate to get great access to decision makers and owners of these businesses that allow us to have, what I would call real commercial discussions, not just the discussions that sort of, teeter around the edges. And the solutions we're helping them with, really do impact their bottom line or change their business or help them meet their objectives. So, we're in a really great position to do that, and it's kind of what gets me excited to come to work every day. It's definitely the client. So hopefully that's a little bit about me covered.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Wow, what a career. As I learned a few things there too. I'll ask you offline about the jobs with mates' businesses. They're always a bit of fun.
Absolutely.
Jumping straight in, very, very broad question to kick us off. How does Amex make money?
Yeah, look, it's a pretty easy question to answer, although there's a lot of complex parts to it. Yeah. But I mean, if we just generally think about it, we're predominantly a card business. So, all of us have a credit card in our wallets or really know how a credit card program works. But in simplest terms, we have a whole heap of merchants out there that would be accepting American Express in their place of business. And maybe the classic scenario would be the coffee shop where you buy a cup of coffee for $5 or $3.50 these days, whatever it is. That merchant, in order to accept an American Express card, would be charged 1-2% to do that. That's our primary source of revenue. So we really get all of our revenue in our business, predominantly about 90% of it across the blue box, through the merchant network. We then use that revenue to reward our card members, whether they're individuals like you and I, or small businesses or corporates or government or institutions. We generally give that value back, or that value exchange back, in the form of either membership rewards or commercial rebates. And I guess the net differential, providing that we don't give away more than we collect, is really how Amex makes its money.
Perfect. Thank you very much. How do you see our industry changing over the next 5 to 10 years? And understand this is a long-winded question, knowing our industry. It's
there's a lot. Well, I think number one is regulation. So if we think about really what's happened the last couple of years for schemes, and we've all seen some changes around how Visa, MasterCard schemes via the banks are now regulated. A lot more transparency in what the customer is getting for the price they're paying, if you're the merchant or in fact the card member. And I guess today Amex is not part of that regulation. Indirectly we've had to respond, but directly we're not regulated because we are a three-party model. Our integrated network, where we have a direct relationship with the card member and the merchant, is very different to the banks, and hence why we're not regulated. But I can see more and more regulation coming to this, especially on the back of the Banking Royal Commission. And I guess as we think about fintech entering more payment space, and it's really interesting to see the likes of peer-to-peer lenders or the afterpays, and just how they've put a new experience around the existing set of rails. And what I mean by that is, you're still ultimately using a credit card or a debit card to do all of these, new capabilities that are afterpay or other lending solutions. But I think we'll find that as these organisations get better, they're more funded, they've got their own investments to make, they'll be thinking about how to use the payments network, or how to maybe even create their own payments network. And that could be an issue for Amex. I guess the other big thing that we're envisaging at Amex that will be very different in 10 years is the fact that we need to be less a card business and more a payments business. So, it's very, very hard for our business to continue to sign merchants up. We've got great penetration where we need it, but we need to develop more solutions where we're making a payment to maybe a beneficiary or a merchant that isn't on our network today. We already have some solutions that can do that, but I think that'll be the next big thing that we really need to be conscious about. And I guess then, how do we make money on those payments? Well, then we need to think about how we lend against that payment stream as well. So I think they're the big changes in the industry, and I still think the biggest one will be regulation.
Perfect. Thank you. That might actually answer the next question, where what's something external to the company that could come along that would force us to substantially change?
Regulation, of course, but if we think beyond regulation, I think Bitcoin or a digital currency or another digital way to replace fiat money will be somewhere with us shortly. It's interesting to see just the opposition to Facebook's Libra at the moment, because they know how powerful Facebook is as a distribution channel. So I think that's going to be huge in some way, shape or form. And if you think about I guess Bitcoin or digital currency, and if you think about how that operates, it kind of works through blockchain, which is really a form of an integrated model. And Amex is already doing that today. So, I would argue Amex needs to be doing more on that front, not less, because we're actually in a pretty strong position because of our model and our frameworks today. And I guess the big unknown is what isn't there today. Fintech in Australia and probably this part of the world hasn't done a lot yet. It's done a lot around the experience using those existing rails, as I've mentioned, whether they're banking rails or credit card rails or scheme rails. But, if someone like a Facebook or an Afterpay or someone else can actually develop their own infrastructure, that will be very, very interesting.
Brilliant. Would you like some coffee? I've been asking you questions over and over and over and not letting you
please
drink your coffee.
Please don't transcript that.
I've just been sitting here drinking. Jason has had a sip the whole time.
Good.
How do you anticipate your staff, let's say, and the company as a whole, how are we preparing for the change?
Yeah, so look, we're investing heavily in technology. There's probably been in the past some criticism of Amex not investing enough in technology, and that's probably been fair to a point. There's actually a lot we've done, and we're actually ahead of the curve in a lot of areas and probably behind in others. And where we're behind, we just have a lot of people filling that gap. So we've got a very strong proposition today, but it still needs work. So I think technology is going to be absolutely filling that void. We are still ultimately, though, a sales and people business. So, I think the amount of people we have in our business today is not going to change dramatically over the next 10 years. Their roles will be hopefully a little bit different, where we're servicing less or servicing more efficiently to drive more growth. And that's important because technology can absolutely play a role around managing your risk profile better or doing that servicing or having digital channels available. But a lot of what we do at Amex is really supplementary or complementary to a competitor's offering. Ultimately, a customer doesn't need Amex because they can get what we give them predominantly through a bank. But what makes us different is our people, our relationship management models, the fact that, Adam's knocking on doors out there in the business community to have a conversation about what value we can add. That's never going to be replaced by automation, robotics, or AI. So we've got to get better at how we source leads and how we source customers, of course, but people is still a big element of that. And I think we need to be really conscious about, as the workforce changes, just what access Amex can get to the right salespeople and the right client people. That's going to be probably the big question as a leadership group we talk about a lot. How do we not just nurture talent, but what does that talent profile look like in 5 or 6 years? And that has everything from the aspect of how much they're going to cost versus how do we train them and keep them and engage them and satisfy them as well. So, yeah, there's a lot in that to unpack.
Beautiful, thank you. And that sort of leads straight into the next one about technology and how do you think that will change the way we conduct business in the future? And I mean, there's obviously a couple of parts to this too. You mentioned around how we source leads and things like that, but also the potential product suite that we could be offering in the future and are currently.
Yeah, and it's probably a neat way to bring in the topic of sustainability, environment, concern, corporate social responsibility, all those great terms we hear about, but they're really important. So, what Amex is really conscious about is plastic. So, we are probably, as a credit card company, we're guilty of maybe not always having a great environmental footprint because the fact that we issue a lot of cards that are plastic. So 2 things we're doing there is obviously thinking about how we can replace plastic with recyclables, and we're starting to do a lot of that in the US. It'll come to Australia shortly. We have a lot of metal cards now, and people will say, well, isn't that more environmentally destructive to produce a metal card? In actual fact, it's better because those metal cards are actually recyclable in a more environmentally efficient way. But of course, the big thing is about tokenization or moving to more digital wallets. And Amex has been leading, especially in Australia, with the use of Apple Pay, Samsung Pay, Google Pay for a long time now. Interestingly, this week, New South Wales brought out the electronic driver's license. It's not going to be long when fiat money is really no longer there. But also, too, the fact that, as individuals, man, woman, we don't need our wallets or purses anymore shortly, right? And I think it is very much about wearables and technology really driving that change. So, once you then can put everything in the app, once you can then put everything in a digital setting, yes, the data can flow from it if you can use it. But really, I think what's more important is about the experience. And again, that's an area that Amex is spending a lot of time thinking about right across the globe. And even when Adam and I, with customers at a local level, experience, we talk about that a lot, because that's really the area that's going to change on the back of technology. Knowing that not every customer can change at the speed you want them to, and that's the big variable.
Perfect, thank you. Comes back to what you mentioned before around regulatory. Do you see any, or are there any recent changes in the law that are likely to affect our company?
Well, there's a few opportunities, and then I'll talk about a few risks. So I think the opportunity, if we think about maybe what's topical in the business community right now is speed of pay, or how to corporate Australia pay small business and vice versa. And there's a lot of conversation about supply chain financing and payables financing or factoring. So that's an opportunity for Amex, because what we do is actually help our customers make their payments more efficiently. So that has a direct community benefit, especially if we're helping our large corporates that Adam and I talk to every day. If we can help them pay their smaller businesses next day, same day, we can really kind of own that change in the business community. We know the banks can't be as nimble as what we can offer in most cases, and that's an area of our expertise that we can really solve for. So that's just one maybe positive. I guess from a negative standpoint, we don't know where that regulation is going to go. We know that the RBA here in Australia is very focused around taking cost out of payments, taking cost out of lending, and being more transparent. So I think that's going to be really interesting. I mean, one of the key risks for, I guess, Amex over the next little while is if loyalty becomes outlawed. That's a real possibility. People kind of laugh at me when I say that, but as Australians, we love frequent flyers, we love membership rewards, we love any loyalty program.
We're the leading market in the world, aren't we? In terms of loyalty and points and usage of points.
Yep.
Sorry to jump in.
100%. 100%.
Australia is world global leading.
Yeah, and I probably won't share, but I can attest to some clients making some maybe not the most efficient business decisions in order to win points sometimes or earn points, and that's okay. That's just part of our psyche, and it's kind of what Australian consumers and businesses are expecting now. So, but imagine that scenario for Amex where we couldn't have them membership rewards from a date in the future. That would totally change our business model. And it might not be regulation. That might be just customer choice, because actually we're starting to see banks now in particular pull back on loyalty, etc. So, so there are probably a couple of things I'm always thinking about when we talk about those external factors.
Perfect. Thank you. Do we expect any changes in social norms that may affect the company going forward?
Yeah.
Just to add to that, I was reading something recently when I was doing the Harvard Amex leadership course.
Yep.
It was we did a case study in America about how, not millennials, my age, so what am I, Gen Y? Gen Y, I think it was.
Pretty old.
Are moving away from, I'm a lot older than everyone else in the group, I can tell you. They're all mid-20s or younger, I think. The people my age over in the States are actually moving away from premium. They're not so much interested anymore in how that could affect Amex. I think that's one thing that,
Yeah, so I think, probably the big social norm for banks and credit card businesses is the fact that actual credit card usage is declining. And actually that trend is actually accelerating. It's not double digit yet, but it's not far off it. And people are, really all of us, millennials, sure, but there is a huge shift to debit card from credit or cash to credit. So cash from credit. So again, if you think of that from a bank, if you think about that from Amex's perspective, we make our money on customers using credit. So if that's declining, and if that's declining from a social norm and that becomes a new norm, then we've got to fundamentally think about, what else should the business be doing? Because when a social norm changes like that, it's very hard to bring that norm back. It's almost impossible to bring that norm back. So, and again, the great example would be, DVD shops versus Netflix, right? That old norm of going down on a Friday night to Blockbuster to get a few DVDs to take home for the weekend, that's just now replaced with immediacy on an app. So, those norms are really important for Amex. And I guess the other part of the norm which we're trying to kind of own is actually loyalty and experience. And because again, we see our competitors doing an okay job at it, but not a great job at it, and that's an opportunity that we feel Amex can fill. So you're seeing Amex out there through a new brand, a new joined up brand, which is great. But we're trying to give our card members and our corporate customers alike, really different, unique experiences, and that means we can continue to engage with them and win more business or more wallet share from them. But it also talks directly to the brand promise of American Express, and that's really important as well.
Thank you. Are you expecting any changes in Australia or the global economy to impact the way business is conducted going forward? We might have covered a lot of this already.
I think the macro one, though, of course, is if you think about what's happening in the US right now, a looming recession. We saw the Fed Reserve lower rates this week for the first time in a long time, which means they're pretty much going to price in a recession in the US next year. The severity of that recession, who knows? If you look at what's happening in Hong Kong, if you look at what's happening with the China-US trade war, if you look at Brexit, you look at the EU a bit sort of silent at the moment, you look at commodity prices, in particular oil, being very volatile at the moment, there is no doubt a lot happening at the moment. What does that mean for Australia? Well, the federal government here is hell-bent on a surplus, which I think is an okay strategy, which means, if we do need to pull the trigger at some point in the future, we should have the ammunition to do it. And I think that's why the Liberal government's going hell-bent on trying to get this surplus together. But if we think about what's happening in the globe, for Australia in particular, I think we're in the fortunate position that we're somewhat isolated from a lot of that noise that's around us. But we've got to be very cognizant of the impacts of anything that does happen in that. I think the big issue for Australia is we've probably got some bigger issues around water and food security in this country from a macro perspective. But I think the bigger global macro issue for us will be just how do we align to both China and the US, and do we start to move away from our really dominant US strategic alliance to more neutral with China involved, because, it's not long before China is going to be the biggest economy in the world, and, from a proximity standpoint, will ultimately become more important as a trading partner than the US. So I think over time, that's going to be a big issue for Australia.
Thank you. This is a really interesting one. I like this question. Who do you consider our top competitor? And are we making any changes directly aimed at them?
Yeah, look, I think top competitor, I think there's probably not one. I mean, you probably need to go product or capability by capability to work out who is our top competitor. But if I had to probably name one, it's probably the international banks. So here I'm talking the likes of a Citibank or a Bank of America, a HSBC. And I say that because those are the banks, compared to the local banks here in Australia, that have, I guess, a more sophisticated payments footprint, that are probably thinking more innovatively around lending against payments, which is where our business is moving. And ultimately, they've got more liquidity and are probably not in the limelight like the local banks are here in Australia, by way of driving, I guess, more effective change and more efficient change. So the Citibanks and the HSBCs alike, they're really our top competitor. How have we changed to combat them or consider them? You can do it through price, but you can only do that for so long. It's really got to be about how we can make our business more global. And we have a strong proposition today, but we need to keep thinking about how we can make that proposition stronger, especially when we are thinking about payments and where our customers are needing us to do business with them in. I say that because the local banks of late have been pulling back throughout the globe and becoming more focused on their Australia or local businesses. Interestingly, even I think Macquarie Bank this week pulled back their UK, US equities businesses and are going to have that coverage out of Australia as an example. ANZ, who had a really strong Asia footprint, has pretty much now shut that business down or sold it. So I think that's an opportunity for us to keep getting better at. And one of the ways we're responding to that is actually increasing which customers actually have global client group coverage in 2020. We're adding about 30% more customers to what we would technically call a global client in 2020 onwards to respond to that. So so hoping that's answered the question there.
It absolutely has. We've just got a couple more follow-up questions. So the next big thing, what would you say that is for us? Is it blockchain? Is it AI? Is it virtual? Is it What do you think that would be? And then the question is, what steps are we taking?
Got it. Yeah, so maybe something a bit more tangible, because I think, there's an area in our commercial business, so the business that, helps small businesses, middle market, large customers do business. We're thinking about how we can offer more lending solutions, and that is everything from an overdraft style loan to payables, factoring through to receivables finance and other capabilities like that. And that doesn't mean we're going to use our corporate card platform to do that. We'll probably do that through a series of partnerships. So while I can't share the name of the partner, Amex will be in the first quarter next year, for the very first time in its history, and Australia pioneering this work, is offering overdrafts to business customers. We've never done that before, so that's an exciting development. I think second to that, and closely linked to that, is the fact that 90% plus of our cards today are charge cards. And in simplest term, what that means is that as you run up that debt or that liability for 30 days, you generally pay it back 21 days later at the end of the month. We're very much focused around trying to think about how do we produce more credit card style products where there are interest, and that interest is then revolving, where maybe that principal isn't paid off but the interest is. And again, that's in response to customers and business customers in particular wanting us to be more flexible to support their lending and their cash flow needs end to end. So I think they're probably two of the big things for Amex in the next little while. And we're investing heavily either through external partnerships, cognizant that we can't always have the systems and the resources to do it well, so we need to find the right partners to help us do it, but also changing the mix of our product and our positioning and our reward back to customer, to think about how we can get customers having more than just one product with us. Revolver or more credit card style capabilities is a big part of that push.
Brilliant. Thank you. The next big thing, does one stand out as the most important and easiest to address? So when we talk about next big thing, it's, those two are great. That's perfect. That's what we're looking at as our next big thing. What this one is sort of talking about is what's the next big trend in the payment industry that we probably need to address, or the most important one we need to address?
I think it's a great question. I think a couple of areas around when you think about payments. I think a lot of it is about visibility and speed. So the new payments platform was released by the banks a little while ago with this really simple promise that you hit the go button on that payment and it should be with your beneficiary or the other side pretty much instantaneously. 4 or 8 seconds is kind of the service level they're expecting, and that replaces the check mechanism, the direct entry system in Australia, where that might be an overnight process. That's sort of been rolled out to consumers. It's been lukewarm in acceptance. It hasn't been probably the shining light that it was expected to be, because the banks are still running dual systems, direct entry and NPP. But if we think about that from a business standpoint, and if we think about our business where we're helping customers with their cash flow, that immediacy of payment across border, across different banking partners, even sometimes across their subsidiaries that might have different banking partners or systems. If you can start to move money in seconds and not days, especially when we're thinking about FX payments that can take 2 to 5 days to get to your beneficiary, if all of a sudden we're starting to do that in seconds and not hours or days or weeks, that's a fundamental change around how businesses will operate. It's fundamental around how, I guess, businesses will fund themselves to operate and also then make investments. So that liquidity question is going to be a really important one for Amex to address. And systems are a big part of it, but I think also how we can produce the right insights and advice and the right change management expertise around that from a treasury standpoint is going to be really, really important as well. That's probably one of the big things that is probably not as sexy or is not as direct out there in the marketplace, but will, I think, in the business community over the next little while have huge ramifications.
Blockchain's associated along with that. Yeah, that's sort of part of it.
Blockchain, more integrated models, corporates joining SWIFT networks in their own rights or creating even their own payment in ecosystems, which is happening a little bit now, digital currency, all those things, they're really kind of either enablers or tools kind of solve that ultimate problem. Not one of them could do it in isolation. It's how they all fit together to play a role.
Beautiful. A couple more, actually three more, I think. What steps or strategy would help the company be ready to take full advantage of this trend? We're already kind of doing it, aren't we?
Yeah, we are, but I guess, are we moving fast enough? I think that's the issue. And look, American Express, while it leads in a lot of areas, from a technology standpoint, is it's pretty known to the marketplace that we're not going to be the first to hit the market with it. So all those technologies that we've mentioned throughout the last little while, we've done. We've done blockchain, FX payments, we've worked with Ripple, we've done some digital currency stuff. And interestingly, a lot of it isn't actually customer ready, and that's kind of why a lot of the stuff is still being talked about as coming, but not here yet. I guess one of the things Amex needs to do, or any organisation, as it prepares for real change in the future, is it has to be courageous to kind of drop what it's good at today, because organisations need to make decisions at all times. Is strategically, are we on the right path for change? But at what point do we exit, or what point do we pivot? And Amex, again, is probably not the most, not the greatest company at doing
That's one
that.
of the next questions is the roadblocks of taking advantage.
Yeah. So our brand is conservative but dynamic, and I guess I say conservative because we will wait until a model is proven before we jump. But when we jump really effectively, is kind of always how I discuss it with my clients. And if you think about what we do with our customers, we help them make payments, and we give them liquidity, we give them credit. You don't want a risk-taking organisation in that mix. And fintech can do other stuff around technology, but what we do is own our network and own it very well. I guess the thing for Amex to think about is how long does it hold on to this absolute need for its integrated model to be front and centre in the way that it generates revenue or generates profitability. As I mentioned, you can't sign every merchant in the world and bring them to your network. You need to find ways to operate more effectively and more profitably in a more payments ecosystem. And I think that'll be the biggest issue for Amex. How does it decide to do more business away from its network at the risk of either cannibalising or even exiting its network at some point in the next 5, 10, however many years? That will always be the conundrum for American Express in the market it operates in.
Beautiful. Very last one. Do we have a plan B if the change fails? So you say that we're trying to work towards this, and the company has to make decisions around how that's going. Is there, in your mind,
A plan B?
a plan B? I don't imagine we have one as a company at the moment.
No, and I guess our plan B is probably more lots of other plans, because we're doing a lot of work with we do a heck of a lot of work with fintechs. It probably goes unpublished, but Amex Ventures is a pretty big fund in the US in Silicon Valley. We've actually interestingly released this week a corporate card for startups that was released in Silicon Valley through our president this week, which is quite cool. But plan B, I think it's a lot of little plans, because Amex has had a lot thrown at it in the last 15 years. Throughout the 80s and 90s, people thought that Amex couldn't survive because of its integrated model, the fact that it wasn't opened up to banks to issue and everything like that. But I think what Amex is really great at is filling gaps in the market, and I think that's our plan B. We are constantly looking at the market, talking to our customers, really listening to our customers to understand where those gaps are. And at a macro level, global level, really thinking about how we can solve those problems. We'd always love to solve more local-based problems, but we are a global business with ultimately a simple set of global defined products. So we're always looking for those gaps globally that we can solve for, whether that's through tokenization, trying to bring more commodities onto our central bill products, or thinking very differently about loyalty and making sure loyalty remains our premium offering compared to our competition globally. And through our people, again, I think a lot of our plan B is actually the strength of our team. The fact that we can do it, better, faster, stronger, sure, but I think the key word there is that we do it differently. And I think customers, especially corporate customers, are gone are the days where you'll have one provider to do everything for them. Corporates, through their innovation charter, through the fact that they can only change what they can change in front of them, they're looking for organisations like Amex and the people within Amex to help them drive that innovation and change. And I think people ultimately is our plan B.
Beautiful. That wraps it up, Jason. Thank you so much for your
thanks,
time.
Alan.
It's greatly
Really appreciate it.
appreciated to grab 35 minutes of your time.
My pleasure.
Yeah, thank you very much again.
Thank you.
And cheers, Jason.
Good luck.
Oh,
Hope
thank
the
you very
marks are
much.
good.
Thank you.
See you later.